Thank you. Good morning. Good afternoon already. I would like to thank the Institute for Cultural Diplomacy for inviting me, and I would congratulate the Institute for gathering such a group of young people with such a heterogeneous cultural background. And it, of course, is a privilege to address you. I would have liked to start with a general accepted definition on peace building. Unfortunately, it doesn't exist. And therefore, I would like to bring to you first to your attention some definitions or meanings on peace building before I start with the attempt to propose some guiding principles of a comprehensive peace-building approach in order to give more insight and in order to provide you with a more comprehensive meaning on that. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. What is peace building? The term peace building was actually created by Johann Galtung, and he addressed you already here in the 1970s. And he related it, and he was, so to say, the grandfather of peace research, who developed a rather broad concept of peace. He was the first one who stated that peace is more than the absence of war, more than the attempt to get rid of a direct physical or psychological violence. He insisted that structural violence, which refers to societal structures, has to be addressed, and in addition also cultural violence, which refers to the consciousness of the people and to their personal behavior. Next time when it became internationally, so to say, recognized, the former Secretary General Boutros Ghali of the UN, Boutros Ghali, came up with the Agenda for Peace in 1992. And he provided a conceptual framework for peace building. Namely, if you see this curve, which somehow symbolize conflict escalation and de-escalation, of course, in the first phase, it is tried to de-escalate the conflict on a certain stage, and of conflict intensity, the conflict became militarized, and then enforcement action takes place before, of course, prevention takes place, and afterwards post-conflict peace building. And this was actually the first internationally acknowledged definition. In his Agenda for Peace, this peace building phase somehow finished with an agreement on a settlement of a conflict. And this was very much criticized. One said that it is more than, one has to do more than to come to a ceasefire agreement and to create, to have elections, but one has to come to the implementation of comprehensive settlement. And this is, of course, peace building as well. In Larger Freedom in 2005, initiated the establishment of the UN Peacebuilding Commission as an intergovernmental advisory body to bring together all relevant actors to marshal resources and to advise on a proposed integrated strategy for post-conflict peacebuilding and recovery. Here again, it focuses on post-conflict situation, not so much on the preventive phase as the first generation, so to say, of the Agenda for Peace, which was then somehow developed. Okay. The capstone doctrine defined peace building as measures aimed at reducing the risk of lapsing or relapsing into conflict by strengthening national capacities for conflict management and laying the foundation for sustainable peace. Here we have again a broader definition covering the preventive phase and the post-conflict phase. And the last one I would like to bring to your attention is a very recent one, a meaning of Catherine Ashton, a High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, and she's also the Vice President of the European Commission. She rejected the request for a peace-building department at a meeting with the European Parliament Committee on Foreign Affairs on 27th October this year by saying, conflict prevention, peace-building is, and I quote, what the EU is about. This is what we do. The core business of everything we do in all countries in which we are operating, not just a department is needing. So she somehow opened up the peace-building issue to everything foreign affairs is doing. Let me now try to come up with some guiding principles, and I will start with always with each of the principles to define some, to develop them from some efforts which are currently taking place and which are not very successful. The first one would be, of course, the crisis prevention. I'm sorry, I left the stick and then the lady offered to make it a better presentation. Now she hacked it. So this is, before this was in one piece and now it is somehow, and then I am not, this is where I have difficulties now. Okay. Unfortunately, I must say, conflict is seen as a negative thing which has to be avoided in many cases. Hence, conflict is not negative in itself, but an inevitable result of the competing interests of different groups, and of course a natural part of the transformation process of the species, leading to a change and possible improvement. So not conflict avoidance, but the recognition of diversity and the transformation of conflict to a less violent stage are needed. And this is also the meaning why I use conflict transformation. And conflict transformation efforts, unfortunately, are very often occur at a time when conflicts have already established, already escalated in a violent manner, i.e. they come too late. So they have to be implemented on an early stage of conflict escalation. And not the traditional early warning is enough. What we need is concrete procedures to research conflict escalation, to come up also not only with warning, but with proposals for early action. The second issue would be common security. One has to achieve security together with a perceived enemy. Unfortunately, the main the main culture of conflict of security policy is that security is tried to be achieved against a perceived enemy by threatening him, i.e. the more I threaten the other side, the more it is possible that they will not attack me. And this approach leads to a build-up of a threat potential which rather raise the possibility of violent conflict than decrease it. It is the security of the other side which raises their own security. Now it's together, fine. Human security address the root causes of violent conflict in a great variety of policy areas such as security sector, economy, social system, the environment, the human rights, the political system, as well as culture, education, information, dissemination. Unfortunately, the symptoms of conflicts and the security of states are the main focus. Okay, I try not to move too fast. I see this is more complicated. No, I think I got it. I think I got it. Yeah. The symptoms, not the causes. If you read the European security strategy, then mentioned are terrorism, proliferation of weapons of mass destructions, regional conflicts, state failure, and organized crime. They are raised as the main challenges. However, these challenges which are appearing on the surface will not be successfully tackled if one does not address the root causes below them. They are related to the needs of the people, related to structural and cultural challenges, such as the growing fractionalization of everyday life and of society, which causes problems for identity and legitimacy of policymakers. So they are the reasons, for example, for fundamentalism, nationalism, terrorism. If one attack only terrorism without looking for the reasons, one will not be successful. So peace-building activities have to be oriented towards the human security of the people. The concept of human security, you may be familiar with it, stems from the UNDP report 1994, and this entailed a broad spectrum of issues related to the agenda for freedom from fear and the freedom of want. As a result of the World Summit 2005, peace and they were supplemented by the freedom to live in dignity. So the World Summit recognized that the development of peace and security and human rights are interlinked and regionally mutually reinforcement. In comparison, the European security strategy was very much criticized that it stated that the security is the basis for development. And one has to emphasize that it is also the other way around. That development needs security, but security also needs development. Important peace-building areas, which admittedly lack clear lines of democratization and frequently overlap, are outlined here in this table. You see in the left column the freedoms according to the human security approach, then the related violation of human needs and the causes of conflicts where these needs are violated, the peace-building areas which have to be addressed, and finally the peace-building tasks, very general tasks related to the various needs. So in order to address the need for survival, you have to protect from psychological and physical violence by the rule of law. The need for well-being you have to address by supporting sustainable socio-economic and ecological development. The need for equality and self-determination by the protection and promotion of human rights and the vulnerable groups. The need for a say in decision-making, for supporting good governance, democratization, civil society. and the need for a guiding principle of a social frame of reference, which do not have really an expression in the human security concept, have to be related to the promotion of culture, education, and information dissemination, in particular in view of trust building and reconciliation. And this also already guides me to my next guiding principle, which is the awareness raising, which is very often neglected. What we see is that conflict transformation is tried to be achieved by the adaptation, change, or installation of governmental and societal structures without addressing prevailing mindsets and behavior patterns of the conflict agents. If you look at the capstone doctrine, for example, you will find there several critical areas mentioned which have to be addressed by peace building. It's the restoring of the state's ability to provide security and maintain public order, is strengthening rule of law and respect for human rights, is supporting the emergence of legitimate political institutions and participatory processes, and is the promotion of social and economic recovery and development, including the safe return of settlement of internally displaced persons and refugees uprooted by the conflict. So these are all structural related issues. But what is missing is that you have to address the mindset of the people. And I will remind you on the UNESCO preamble, it is exactly because of this that the UNESCO states, since wars begin in the minds of man, it is in the minds of man that defenses of peace must be constructed. And people in conflict have to become aware of the reasons of the conflict and the necessities regarding social change, trust building and reconciliation. And Anita Trisic-Babic and Marina Pendes already mentioned this importance, in particularly with regard to education, for example. The next point would be empowerment and ownership, to involve and empower people in crisis regions and assist them in taking charge of conflict transformation. People living in crisis regions must not be instrumented as objectives of interventions, but involved and empowered according to their needs. This is one more prerequisite for those concerned to take charge of conflict transformation, because this only will help them or will enable them to withdraw as international actors. The protection and empowerment of women. Women have to specifically taken care of as victims of violent conflicts, but also empowered as agents of change. Women very often bear the brunt of violence, are not taken sufficiently into account when it comes to protection against violence, as we have seen recently in Congo, but also not taken into account when it comes to de-escalation efforts. For example, joining peace processes. Women can make a special contribution to peace processes and have to be supported and involved on all levels of conflict transformation. And Marina Pendres already mentioned the UN resolution 1325. And unfortunately, she is right. This is a good resolution, but the outcome is the resolution is, we have celebrated the 10th anniversary, not to celebrate, we have commemorated the 10th anniversary. There was nothing to celebrate, unfortunately. The next point would be do no harm and conflict impact assessment. Avoid adverse effects by systematically studying possible sequence. When we're offering help in conflict situation, good intentions are less than inadequate. In ugly situations, help may even cause the opposite of what is intended. Hence, it is crucial for all conflict interventions to have negative sequels that may contribute to a violent escalation of conflict identified by means of conflict impact assessment. And in this way, to avoid adding to the harm. It is imperative to collect sufficient background information about the conflict, its issues, and its course, as well as about the internal and external agents. The next one would be sustainability. Try to achieve lasting de-escalation of the conflict beyond the immediate effect. Unfortunately, very often conflict transformation is seen as a short-term effort, which is aimed at the creation of a visible and clearly describable product. I.e., when an agreement of a settlement of a conflict has been achieved or election have taken place, so we were successful. This is unfortunately not the case. So there is a need for sustainable efforts to support the implementation of a comprehensive settlement, as well as coordinated programs to ensure that the original causes of war are eradicated. Non-violence emphasizes civilian and non-military options that are distinct from military actions. Unfortunately, military strategies dominate over political approaches. Military means are always declared as the ultima ratio, the last resort, if political approaches fail. But if one looks at the personal, material, and financial sources which are devoted to the civilian approaches in comparison with the military one, it becomes quite clear which of them is the dominating element. So conflict transformation efforts, which addresses the root of conflict and the security of the people, need to give priority to non-violent options. In case civilian conflict transformation efforts take place in parallel with military actions, they have to favor a multidimensional peacekeeping approach, which includes military, police, and civilian components on a cooperative and coordinated but distinct basis. NGO involvement. Civilian conflict transformation strategies are often dominated by a top-down approach, by traditional diplomatic skills and strategies that are not sufficient in protected societies and protected conflict with various societal roots and various conflict parties. The peace-building capacity of civil society is very often neglected. So what conflict transformation efforts need, that they have to be built upon an intensive cooperation between governmental and non-governmental organizations from the conflict society and from abroad. The specific merits of non-governmental organizations and of non-governmental agents in the conflict area and from outside have to be involved, and there are as follows, and I would quote 6 specific merits. One would be NGO activities are much more connected to the needs of the people as to formal relation and interests of political fractions. Therefore, NGO perform better against desolidarization and the destruction of meaningful life. Second, NGO are much more capable to build upon the roots of society and conflict instead of their institutional and political appearance. Therefore, NGO can perform much better, not only issues, but also on matters of relationships, which might have a century-old history in a conflict area. NGOs need to not represent governmental interests, nor comply with diplomatic conventions. This gives them greater leeway for action. NGOs are less prone to be suspected of representing power political interests, which they seek to exploit to their own advantage. NGOs are more flexible i.e. there are no long drawn legitimacy procedures with individual countries or vis-à-vis partner countries, and are consequently better placed than governmental organizations to implement preventive measures. And finally, some NGO can mobilize initiative tools, human and financial resources, which are not or not as easy accessible to governmental organizations. Cooperation and networking. The interdependence of conflict transformation efforts by various state institutions in the diplomatic, development, defense, financial, economic, humanitarian, justice, and police community, as well as non-governmental actors in the field of development cooperation, humanitarian aid, human rights, protection, promotion, and other peace-related areas is often neglected. Their success is often hampered by ignorance, communication deficits, or competition. Therefore, a 3C approach, taking care of coherence, complementarity, and coordination of all actors on the ground is needed. This entails specific issues of quality approach, working principles, and access at different levels, as outlined in the Vienna 3C appeal, which was issued this summer, where in Austria, the Ministry of the Defense, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and NGOs from the peacebuilding community, from the humanitarian aid community and development community worked out this approach. Information. Information on the different positions of conflict parties, as well as on the position of those willing to assist them in managing conflict, is of vital importance. So international players can help to render reporting on events in the region more objective and thus counter lopsided propaganda speared by the conflict parties. Moreover, they need as early as possible to inform the population concerned and the institution and organization within the regions about their plans, in order to nip rumors and in the bud, and also to make it easier for those in need and those willing to cooperate to contact them. Training. There is an absence of adequate training for people in conflict transformation, and this does not only rely to people in conflict situations, in conflict areas, but also for the people who are sent there. For example, the Austrian Studies Center, where I come from, we developed since '92 training programs to prepare civilian experts for working in crisis areas. But also on the strategic level, we rather recently developed two programs, one on security sector reform and one on peace building, to inform people on the more the strategic level, coming from ministries, defense, internal affairs, development agencies, also NGOs, with an idea what is peace building, what is going on in the conflict area, and what is needed, which agents are active there. This is of importance. Recruitment. Unfortunately, there is still little done on the development of databases for experts who are sent to the field, or who can be sent to the field, which are also compatible, for example, with regard to deployment organization, with regard to the training organization, with regard to the recruitment organization. They have to be interlinked, and unfortunately, this is not available. Lessons learned. Peacebuilding projects and programs need a thorough evaluation and accompanying research for lessons learned in order to enable, first, the deploying organization to integrate these lessons learned in their future activities and thus perform better. Second, the training institutions to optimize their training programs. And thirdly, the experts coming back from the field to better understand and learn from their own and from other experiences. This, of course, can be best done by institutions who combine training, recruitment, deployment, and feedback from the missions. This is the case, for example, in Germany. It's the case in Sweden, in Sweden. Unfortunately, in most of the countries, there are no training institution, but where they are very often not linked to the recruitment and deployment. To sum up, to put it somehow in a nutshell, there is a need for conflict transformation efforts within conflict areas as well as from outside that are related to the root causes and the related human needs of the population in the conflict areas, contributing to awareness raising, empowerment, and ownership, with specific attention to the role of women, cooperative with the civil society and other actors in the field, non-violent, flexible, and practical, and which counteract violent escalation at an early point, and finally, well-prepared, transparent, sustainable, and self-reflexive. If these requirements are met, we can name this effort peace building. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Truger. Okay, these are the first two I saw.
Thank you. First, I want to congratulate you. I want to say thank you, the way you have said thank you up there. Congratulate you on a very comprehensive and useful set of guidelines. But I have 3 comments. One, you, and by the way, other speakers over the last few days have emphasized, you and other speakers also have emphasized over the last few days the need to train appropriate people during the pre-armed conflict and the post-armed conflict periods. But I would suggest that we should not overlook efforts during the conflict period that would then contribute to peace building. So it's not just pre and post, but also during, I would suggest. The second thing is I was very pleased to see that you brought in human security, and as part of that, the need for environmental considerations. But I have the feeling, both in this case and in the 1 or 2 other instances where this issue was brought up in previous presentations, that the entire approach was anthropocentric. In other words, the needs of humans, the needs, environmental considerations to make life for people better. But we should not lose track of the fact that there's an ecocentric reason for protecting environment as well. In other words, flora and fauna and habitats and wildlife and the environment in general should be protected in its own right as well. And finally, a small point. You said it's important to train civilians in post-conflict efforts, but let me suggest that we shouldn't forget the need to train military as well, because whether we like it or not, there's a lot, well, even, I shouldn't say like it or not, take the blue helmets. They are in uniform and yet also need appropriate training. Thank you.
Okay, given the time constraints, Surrender, we'll take 2 more questions, and if we can group them together, that'd be good.
So hello, my name is Sylvia, and as I had been working in NGOs in Austria and in India as well, I made the experience that often there's a big problem about projects and NGOs that are doing overlapping works. So my question would be, how could that overlapping work could be avoided, and how can we highlight the necessity to cooperate with each other within the landscape of NGOs? And I guess that there is a big problem to make a difference between NGOs and NGOs that are instrumentalized by governments. I guess that you know the problem in Austria, and with asylum-seeking NGO that got lots of work to do, and I guess that's a quite important point.
Thank you very much. My name is Sibel, and I've worked in the past, for the past 10 years in conflict-affected areas and countries, and I've been present in some instances, like in Liberia, where you saw the peace builders arriving, and I think we shouldn't forget that sometimes, like, these armies of experts that come into these countries, and it's often quite visual, also when they put down their camps, the compounds they almost look like fortified prisons with barbed wires, and I mean the walls are even visual between the peace builders and the locals. And sometimes I think we shouldn't forget that there is sometimes really a disconnect between the local reality and the experts that are trained in Western institutes. And I think there's a lot of experts also on the ground that are not really listened to. And the second point I wanted to say about the NGOs, and I mean, we heard it also in the other presentations that there is a need for more integration of military and civil actors, but I think we should kind of reflect on that as well, because it does not always have positive outcomes to have such a close cooperation, because also for the people in the countries that these armies come, they don't know anymore who is who and who does what.
Okay. Starting by the first gentleman, training during the conflict period. Well, I think we have to distinguish whom we train in a conflict period. From a peace-building point of view, I would argue that those who are going into a conflict period as a mission member should be trained on site as well. This is already somehow a good practice with international organizations like the UN or the OSCE. For example, the OSCE is sending also from their missions people to our center from the missions to be trained there and further educated there on specific issues in the mission. There's a different thing with the people in the conflict area, from the conflict area to be trained. And here I would distinguish between a training situation where there is combat going on, then there is no, you can take them out, but not train them there. And if not, of course, then I would not say a training, but I would say an awareness raising by bringing conflict parties together would be using training as a conflict transformation tool. This is what we did from our institution on several occasions. With regard to the environmental, I fully agree. With regard to train not only the civilians, I fully agree. Unfortunately, I must say, military and police have established training programs, but not the civilian. And this is the problem. What is also needed on a strategic level, those where civilian, military, and police have to work together, in, for example, to run missions, then they have to be trained together. So, for example, in our SSR program or in our peacebuilding program, we invite military, civilian, and police together. Sylvia, the overlapping work and cooperation and the gongos, the governmental organized, non-governmental organizations. Well, of course, they exist, and we have to take care of it. We have to be aware of the distinction between NGO and state. It would lead too far if I I would elaborate on that, but I would fully agree. A specific problem is on the cooperation of NGOs in a conflict area seeking money from outside. And so this somehow constitutes competition and non-collaboration. But this can be taken care of. More and more international organizations also taking that together and say, we only want to support joint efforts. And this is I think, a good mean. Civil, the disarmament of and expert. Yeah, of course. Local experts, yeah, of course, they are the most important one. They know about, they know much better than the others about their situation. And we invite, for example, for our training, for the missions, experts from conflict areas who not working there as foreigners, but are from there. They are the best. And the integration of military and civil, yeah. Of course, this is a problem, and therefore I said also on a distinct basis. Collaborate and work on a distinct basis. You should also always make clear who is who, and by that I think it is very problematic that the military take on civilian tasks and provide also humanitarian aid, in particularly for humanitarian organization. This is a great problem. And here we should really try to have a very distinct line between the military and the civilian in an area.
Mr. Truger, thank you very much for your time with us this morning.
My pleasure.